All rise. Veuillez vous lever. Please be seated. Veuillez vous asseoir.
So I see Mr. Bourgon on his feet. Mr. Bourgon, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would just like to note for the record the presence of two additional team members on the defense side, Mademoiselle Daria Mechetti and Mademoiselle Yasmin Sentisi. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Bourgon. I also see some changes on the prosecution part. Ms. Simpson.
Yes, Mr. President. I would like to note for the chamber that Ms. Bensouda is no longer in the courtroom.
Thank you. Well noted. During the first session, we have heard two initial part of the prosecution closing statements presented by Ms. Bensouda and Ms. Simpson. Now I have on my list Ms. Rabani. Ms. Rabani, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Honors, and good morning. Mr. President, Your Honors, I will be addressing the crimes committed by UPC troops during the second attack. I will start with an overview of the unfolding of the crimes perpetrated by Bosco Ntaganda's troops during this attack in the Walendu Jatsi collectivité in February 2003. I will then focus on the charges of rape and sexual slavery and respond to the Chamber's question on this topic. I will address the defense arguments regarding the reliability of the prosecution's witnesses relevant to the second attack and conclude with the evidence adduced to prove that UPC troops perpetrated the mass murders in Kobu. Shika Namukono, meaning in Swahili, catch them with bare hands. This is what the UPC soldiers shouted as they caught fleeing civilians. The words left such a vivid impression that the population still refers to the second attack as the Shika Namukono attack. Military insider P963 testified that the order to catch with bare hands was issued during the second attack, and many crime-based witnesses testified that this is what they heard as they were pursued by the UPC troops in the forest. Bosco Ntaganda himself testified that this cry was intended to frighten the enemy and capture people without using bullets. This also reveals that the UPC soldiers were targeting unarmed civilians. Because, Your Honors, one does not catch armed combatants with bare hands. The prosecutor brought 13 charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity for this attack. This extensive range of criminality is demonstrated by a solid body of evidence which proves beyond reasonable doubt that the UPC committed the crimes as charged and that Bosco Ntaganda is liable for them. The accused may not have been physically present among the troops that attacked Walendu Jatsi. He is nevertheless responsible for the crimes because they occurred in application of the UPC plan to oust the Landu, because they were committed by his troops during an attack he planned, because he issued operational orders, because he sent and he received situational reports, because he knew of the crimes. My colleagues, Ms. Looping and Mr. Iverson, will say more on the modes of liability in a moment. 21 crime-based witnesses and 6 former UPC soldiers provided evidence about the crimes committed by the UPC troops during this attack. 3 psychotherapists and medical experts, P938, P939, and P975, examined 5 of the witnesses who suffered grave physical and psychological harm. They fully corroborated their accounts, where it was possible to reach a conclusion. In addition, forensic evidence from exhumation relevant to the charge of murder was presented by 5 expert witnesses. Expert P810 testified about the destruction of property visible on satellite images of various locations of the Walendu Jatsi collectivity. Your Honors, the prosecution's evidence of the second attack is diverse and paints a consistent picture. A large-scale campaign of crimes directed by the UPC against the civilian population to gain control of this predominantly Lendu area. On your screens, you should be able to see a map. So this map represents the most important villages of the Walendu Jatsi collectivité, which were attacked by UPC troops. On the top left is Montboilou, and on the bottom right, you can see Bunia. In yellow are the 2 roads relating the 2 towns. 2 towns which were, by this time, in February 2003, under the control of the UPC. With this attack, the UPC sought to control the most direct route and the one in better condition, which was the one going to Bunia, from Bunia to Montboilou through Kobu. However, the UPC attack also aimed at driving out the civilians, as confirmed by military insiders present on the ground, P17 and P963. The pattern that emerges from the assault on Walendu Jatsi proved that crimes were an integral part of the attack and that civilians were its constant target. The UPC committed these crimes continuously and repeatedly in villages as the attack unfolded. For the second attack, the UPC leadership deployed the same troops that had committed crimes during the first attack. The order to charge and plunder, issued by Bosco Ntaganda in Mabanga, was reiterated by Commander Mulenda for the second attack. As a result, the UPC's criminal modus operandi repeated itself in Walendu Jatsi, as it has been seen in the first attack. A UPC military insider, P963, explained, I quote, "It was the same operation, Pigana Kuchaji, and we were fighting the Lendu. The orders were clear, shoot at everyone." You have heard UPC military insiders explain how their commanders ordered them to displace the Lendu, to shoot at fleeing civilians, and to burn down entire villages. First, the UPC troops attacked Lipri, Kobu, and Bambou on or about 18 February 2003. These assaults generated massive displacement of the population. The population had no choice but to flee or to be killed. P790 told the court how he saw his children shot dead before his eyes by the assaulting UPC troops. You have heard P863's account of his desperate escape through the bush with his pregnant wife and infant children. He later described how displaced people around them died in the bush due to the terrible living conditions, sick, deprived of shelter and of food. UN agencies estimate that 60,000 individuals were displaced during the second attack. The evidence shows that attacks against civilians occurred in or around 20 villages in Walendu Jatsi. Once the UPC troops settled in the main villages, they continued to assault civilians. They extensively looted, they set civilian homes on fire, and attacked buildings protected under international humanitarian law. You have heard witnesses describe how the UPC troops attacked and pillaged the Bamboo Hospital. UPC soldiers even massacred the patients who could not flee the assault in the hospital. The UPC put together entire systems to loot. They captured civilians just for this purpose. They used P18, P113, P19, and P39 as porters of their pillaged goods. Some were forced to bring back loot to Bunia when the troops retreated there. You have heard senior military insider P55 testify that such crimes were intended to prevent the resettlement of the non-Hema inhabitants of the area. When P790 was able to return to his home, he testified that, and I quote, "They left nothing behind that would enable us to inhabit the house again," end quote. By looting mattresses, roofs, crops, or medical equipment, by torching houses and destroying hospitals, but also schools and orphanages, the UPC was effectively depriving the population of all social support structures and means of survival. When senior UN officer P317 described the area she investigated in Walendu Jatsi after the UPC assault, she said, and I quote, "That was one of the worst situations that I saw during all these years in the Congo," end quote. UPC troops chased and encircled the population displaced in the forest. They hunted them down. P300 described the movement of UPC troops towards the civilians displaced in the center of the triangle between Lipri, Bamboo, and Kobu. He says, and I quote, that the troops were closing the circle, end quote, on the, and I quote again, asphyxiated population. UPC troops either killed these displaced individuals on the spot or caught them to use them as porters of their war booty. Military insider P963 confirmed that during ratissage operation, which is the French for mop-up operation, I quote him, "The persons who were found were either killed or captured," end quote. The soldiers also sexually enslaved some of their abductees, beating them, raping them at will, and further exploiting them for chores under armed guard. You have heard witness P18 describe how she was forced out of her village by the UPC attack how she was displaced through the bush, running away with her baby on her back. UPC soldiers captured her and forced her to carry looted goods for them. At her place of detention, she witnessed UPC soldiers gang rape other women under severe beatings and eventually execute some of them. A soldier grabbed her and he raped her. Then he shot her at close range when she resisted. Her baby was still there, next to her. Your Honors, the victims of this assault who testified for the prosecution each suffered or witnessed multiple UPC crimes. This shows the intention of persecution towards the non-HEMA civilians. P18 and P19, for example, were both direct victims of attacks on civilians, of persecution, of displacement of population, of rape, of sexual slavery, and of attempted murder. P100 suffered from and provided evidence on attack against civilians, destruction of property, murder, displacement of population, and pillaging. P863 testified about murders, attack against protected object, displacement of population, attack against civilian, persecution, and pillaging. And Your Honors, I could go on. This reveals the systematicity of the crimes and the civilian nature of the attack. I am now moving on to the charges of rape and sexual slavery. First, I will address a question we received from Your Honors. I will read it out loud for the record. I quote, The prosecution closing brief contains a section that addresses both rape and sexual slavery, allegedly having occurred during the Walendu Jatsi assault / second attack, in between parentheses, paragraphs 568 to 586. This section refers to a testimony of several witnesses and mentions multiple locations, persons, and acts. What are the specific instances or persons that the prosecution submits were subjected to sexual slavery? This is the end of the question. In answer to your question, the prosecution submits that P18, P19, and P113 are direct victims of sexual slavery perpetrated by the UPC troops, as described in paragraph 574, 576, and 578 of the closing brief. The UPC armed soldiers deprived them of their liberty. During a military attack, they captured them, they detained them, they prevented them from leaving. They shot at 2 of them who tried to escape and who tried to resist their rape. The UPC used force and threat, referring to the victims as, I quote, not human, end quote, and, I quote, useless wild animals, end quote, as P19 testified. The perpetrators were in total control of their victims, transferring them to various locations, using them for chores, cooking, using them as porters, using them as sexual slaves. In addition, the following incidents constitute sexual slavery. First, the incidents described by P19 of women and men raped by multiple UPC soldiers, some using wooden sticks to penetrate them, while detained in a house in Kobu, where the women were forced to cook for the soldiers. This is at paragraph 574, of the prosecution closing brief, and this is in transcript 115 at pages 36 to 46 of this witness evidence. Second, the incident described by P18 of captured women who had been separated from male detainees and who were gang raped by UPC soldiers, some of them shot after having been raped. This is at paragraph 576 of the closing brief, and at transcript 1111, pages 10 to 20 of this witness's evidence. Third, the 11-year-old Landu girl captured by UPC commander Simba during ratissage operation near Kobu, whom he raped and kept during the offensive before bringing her back to Bunia. This is at paragraph 582 of the closing brief, and this is at transcript 60, pages 28 and 29 of this witness's evidence. Fourth, the 3 women who told P790 that UPC soldiers abducted them, raped them, and used them as slaves. One of the women was forced to carry the soldiers' belongings and was then abandoned in Central. This is at paragraph 581 of the closing brief, and this is at transcript T54, pages 32 to 34 of this witness's evidence. The prosecution submits that the factual description elicited in testimony for this incident satisfied the required element of sexual slavery. Your Honors, I would now like to address whether coercion is part of the second element of the crime of sexual slavery. We submit that it is not. On your screen is a slide of the 2 first elements of sexual slavery. I quote the second element: the perpetrator caused such person or persons to engage in one or more acts of a sexual nature. End quote. The English and Spanish version of the elements of the crime reflect an absence of coercion requirements by providing that the perpetrator, I quote, caused, end quote, such person or persons to engage in one or more acts of a sexual nature. In the Abre case, before the extraordinary African chambers, the trial chamber analyzed the crime of sexual slavery, referring to the French formulation of the ICC elements of crimes, in which the perpetrator, and I quote in French, a contraint, end quote, such person to engage in the sexual act. The judges examined this in French, a contraint, as indicia of the exercise of the powers of ownership under the first element, not under the second element. The judges considered the sexual act as part of any other indicia of the enslavement, such as capture and detention, in reaching the conclusion that sexual slavery had occurred. I refer your honors to paragraphs 1502, 1505, and 1536 of the judgment of the trial chamber in the Abre case. We ask that the chamber proceeds in the same manner in this case. For the crime of sexual slavery, the sexual act caused by the perpetrator is a required indicia of the exercise of the powers of ownership by the perpetrator. Other, non-required indicia can be fieldwork, housework, detention. The second element of this crime highlights the sexual nature of the enslavement. The sexual act is not an additional standalone crime within the crime of enslavement. Rather, it is a specific manifestation of this particular type of enslavement. Therefore, once it is established that a sexual act took place in the context of the perpetrator's exercise of the powers of ownership over the victim, there is no further requirement or additional inquiry into coercion in relation to the sexual act. Otherwise, it would lead to circular and redundant findings that the perpetrator held the victim under their complete control, and then, again, that the perpetrator coerced the victim because he or she exercised complete control over them. Because perpetrators who exercise the power of ownership over victims exercise this total control over them, courts do not assess whether a victim was coerced to do each and every act of the enslavement, such as performing chores or carrying looted goods in order to show that they were enslaved. The prosecution submits that the Katanga trial chamber's view regarding sexual slavery, according to which, and I quote, "The second element concerns the victim's ability to decide the conditions in which he or she engages in sexual activity," end quote, is misplaced. No such ability exists once a person is enslaved. But moreover, such analysis wrongly shifts the focus from the acts of the perpetrator to the state of mind of the victim. This shift is unsupported by the elements of the crime. Now turning to the defense's arguments, Your Honor. Bosco Ntaganda, the UPC Deputy Chief of Staff in charge of operations, implausibly denied knowing anything about this complex, coordinated attack on the Walendu Jati collectivité. Even more incredible, despite claiming not to know anything about the attack, he denies that his troops committed crimes and claims the prosecution witnesses are fabricating their evidence. The defense contends that the delayed reporting of rape cast doubt on the credibility of witnesses P18, P19, and P113. However, expert P938 explained that delay in reporting this type of crime is common. She testified that victims universally fear shame, stigmatization, relationship breakdown, and ostracization if they report their rape. All three witnesses explained to Your Honors in detail why they had not come forward earlier due to shame and fear. P938 also concluded, based on her expert experience, that the psychological consequences exhibited by those witnesses are wholly consistent with their accounts. When addressing the defense's challenges to any so-called inconsistencies or to the witnesses' lack of memory, we asked the chamber to consider the obvious impact of trauma. All three witnesses were diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. The defense attempt to paint some of the prosecution witnesses as coached, contaminated, or having colluded is devoid of any basis. Nothing in the witnesses' testimony, in their answer to cross-examination question, or in the documents relied upon by the defense even suggests any attempt to influence their account. It is simply defense speculation. I refer your honors to a detailed submission on this topic developed in the prosecution closing brief and in the prosecution's response to the defense's closing brief. But I will say this: the evidence speaks for itself. We invite your honors to look carefully at how unique and specific each account is. These witnesses testified from very different perspectives. Some are notables from Lipri, others crop growers from Kobu. They resided in different villages when the UPC attacked. They were displayed through various routes and locations. They witnessed different criminal acts committed by UPC soldiers at different times. They have described in distress how the UPC crimes impacted their lives, when their physical integrity was violated, or when the UPC killed their husband or their children. For some of them, your honors could see for yourself the physical scars and psychological wounds that they still carry with them. Your honors are able to analyze just how comprehensive, specific, detailed, and credible each testimony is. Moreover, those witnesses' testimonies are corroborated by other items of evidence. Witnesses contacted when the investigation resumed in 2013, such as P805, P863, P868, and P790. They're also corroborated by expert witnesses and forensic evidence. But most of all, their testimony is supported by Bosco and Ntaganda's own soldiers who participated in this attack and who fully corroborate that the UPC committed each and every type of crime charged for the locations each of those soldiers attacked, just as these witnesses say they did. Your honors, I will finish this presentation with what is perhaps the most notorious criminal event of the second attack: the massacre by UPC troops of unarmed, mostly Landu, children, women, and men, which occurred on or about 26 February 2003 in Kobu. During that night, UPC soldiers executed one by one some 50 captured individuals, including over 20 family members of witnesses who testified before this court. The body of evidence put forward by the prosecution is comprehensive, detailed, internally consistent, and corroborative. First, the prosecution presented audio evidence, which 5 witnesses confirm is a recording of radio communications between UPC soldiers during the second attack. The audio recording establishes that UPC troops captured unarmed individuals to bring them back to locations controlled by the UPC and reported this to Brigade Commander Mulanda. A former UPC soldier confirmed in court that those prisoners were brought to Kobu and then later executed. P19, P113, and P39 were among those Lendu captured by the UPC in the forest. P963 and P17, former UPC soldiers, saw the prisoner later being escorted to the path, later being escorted on the path to the banana field where they were going to be murdered. A witness was in line to be executed. She described how terrified and paralyzed she was as UPC soldiers massacred men and women before her eyes. You have heard a military insider describe the bloodied murder weapons he saw the next morning while openly discussing the killings with soldiers who had perpetrated the massacre. Once UPC soldiers left Kobu, the population came out of the forest and discovered the murder scene. You have heard witnesses describe how they walked around the bodies that day to find their wife, their children, and their loved ones massacred. Several witnesses described the scene. I quote P790. I saw the bodies of children, women, the bodies of young people. Some people had been beaten to death. Some of the women had been disemboweled. One pregnant woman, they had cut the fetus out of her, end quote. P121 observed that some of the sex organs of the victims had been perforated by sticks. Others had the sexual organs cut off. P805 testified that for some of the corpses, and I quote, their arms were tied and some were wearing underwear only, and the heads of those bodies had been crushed with the mortars that were there, end quote. These descriptions correspond to the 8 individual photographs of the bodies massacred in Kobu, admitted into the case record. 9 witnesses testified that these photos depict the scene of the massacre in the banana field. I would like to show you some of these photos.
Could you please confirm that these photographs are public?
Yes. Your honors can see the dead bodies piled up on the banana leaves and the population discovering the bodies. When we zoom in the photo, we can see that the arms have been tied and also that this person's behind, his or her throat has been slit. On the second photo, you can see a woman. It's a second body in the background. Her throat has been slit and her womb cut open. A third photo. You can see on the bottom right the body of a man who has visible injury to his torso, and he's wearing blue pants with a wide waist band. These trousers match those found on skeletal remains exhumed in Kobu. This is the grave, the pants with a wide waistband. This is the pants once they were washed. And this is the body of the man with the same pants. Your honors, when conducted exhumations of some of the graves in Kobu, forensic anthropologist P420 concluded that they differed from local customary burials. Under local customs, the burials are narrow and deep. Single bodies are placed in coffins and buried in individual graves. Contrary to these customs, these bodies were exhumed from latrines, and multiple bodies were exhumed from single graves. The bodies were all similarly oriented, the graves were unmarked, and they were close to one another, strongly suggesting that they were dug at or around the same time. And the bodies buried consistently showed blunt force trauma to the head. Following the exhumations, expert pathologist P937 examined the skeletal remains of 6 bodies buried in Kobu. He testified that 3 died from blunt force trauma. Blunt force trauma to the head, that 2 others may have died from blunt force trauma, and that 1 received a gunshot wound to the neck. Another expert pathologist, P935, examined 8 other skeletal remains buried in Kobu. He found that 7 of the corpses he examined showed signs of blunt force trauma to the head, and the last one showed a burn possibly related to a projectile injury, meaning gunshot. He testified that the likely manner of death of these 8 corpses he examined was homicide. This evidence is consistent with the evidence of military insiders from the UPC who participated in the attack and of the victim who narrowly escaped this death, who lost loved ones, and who found the bodies the following morning. Former UPC soldier, witness P963, testified that the civilians in Kobu had been executed simply because, and I quote, they were Lendu. No one was ever punished for these crimes in the UPC. When asked about the killing of civilians in Kobu by Salumu Mulenda's troops, a senior military insider testified that Bosco Ntaganda said, I quote, Salumu was a man, a real man, end quote. This concludes this presentation, Your Honor. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Robani. I would like to make a slight correction of the English version of transcript of your presentation, and please follow me whether I am correct, because you mentioned it's English version, page 64, line 23. You mentioned the case before the Extraordinary African Chambers. It's case of Hissène Habré, but the name is misspelled, so I believe that the right spelling is H-A-B-R-E. Am I correct, Ms. Robani?
It is correct. I may just add that there is an accent on the E, but the way you spell it, I think is enough for the transcript.
Thank you very much, Ms. Robani. And now the next speaker on my list representing prosecution is Ms. Sim. Ms. Sim, please take the floor.
Mr. President, Your Honors, I will now address the crimes of conscripting or enlisting children under the age of 15 or using them to participate actively in the hostilities, as well as the rape and sexual slavery of these children by UPC soldiers. I will highlight the prosecution's evidence of each of these crimes, starting with recruitment, then the crimes of sexual violence, and finally, the ways in which child soldiers were used. In so doing, I will provide an overview of the types of evidence the prosecution relied upon, including witness testimony, documentary evidence, as well as video evidence that shows the presence of children under the age of 15 in the UPC. I will conclude by showing a few examples of this video evidence. Bosco Ntaganda and his co-perpetrators' plan to take control of Ituri required an army and a steady supply of soldiers. The UPC recruited these soldiers throughout Ituri in a widespread and coordinated manner. The UPC sought to recruit as many people as possible, regardless of their age. Indeed, 11 former UPC members testified that there was no age limit on recruitment in the UPC. Even defense witness D13 testified that no one ascertained the ages of these people and that no one actually verified that. In the course of this trial, you heard consistent, credible evidence from numerous prosecution witnesses about the obvious presence of children in the UPC. They were often referred to as kidogo, a Swahili word meaning small or young one. You heard about the presence of these children from political and military insiders, including individuals who not only saw child soldiers but personally used them. You heard from former UPC child soldiers and their family members. You heard from victims of UPC crimes, as well as from individuals based in the region whose very job it was to identify and assist child soldiers. These witnesses also testified about how they were able to assess the ages of children that they encountered or interacted with. For instance, several witnesses testified about the size of the children, how their uniforms were ill-fitting or oversized so that they had to roll up the sleeves or the trouser legs, and about how they had difficulty carrying their weapons. Others testified about the facial features or physical development, as well as how their behavior or mannerisms showed that they were children. Still others explained that they could assess the age of the children they saw based on their experience as parents or teachers. Corroborating this witness testimony is reliable documentary evidence attesting to child soldiers in the UPC, such as Minuk reports from the period of the charges, as well as internal UPC documents that refer to the presence of children within the ranks. The prosecution also relied on the entry and exit logs from a demobilization center and from notebooks and certificates of former children who went through this center, tendered through witness P31. The vast majority of these children had been soldiers with the UPC, which both illustrates the scale and the volume of the UPC's recruitment of children under 15. Armed UPC soldiers abducted children from villages on their way to school or to collect water. This is exactly what happened to former child soldiers, witnesses P758, P883, and P888. Children were pressured to join the UPC as a result of recruitment drives at the village level, where parents and community leaders were coerced or persuaded into providing their children, fearing that their villages would be left undefended from attack if they did not. Witness P963 was present at one such gathering, following which he saw young Hema, including children under 15, taken from the village to a UPC training camp. You also heard from witness P898, who joined the UPC at the age of 13, out of a desire to protect his community and to avenge the death of family members. It does not matter whether children under 15 joined voluntarily or were forcibly recruited. Both are a crime, and consent is not a defense. There were no genuine policies to ensure children under 15 were not recruited by the UPC, as the defense contends. In fact, an internal UPC letter appearing on your screen, dated the 12th of February, 2003, written by the UPC National Secretary to the G5 commander of the FPLC, and copied to the UPC president and the État-Major, the military general staff in Bunia, refers to a DDRRR program. That stands for demobilization, disarmament, re-education, resettlement, and reintegration. And I quote in French, en faveur des enfants soldats, aged 10 to 15 or 16 years. You will also note in this document that participation in this program was voluntary, not mandatory. It was for those children aged 10 to 15 or 16 who willingly accepted to return to civilian life. Now, this attempt to demobilize children within the UPC never happened. Bosco Ntaganda testified that he was not familiar with the document and did not receive it. However, this document does provide clear evidence that children under the age of 15 were in the UPC and that senior officials knew. The evidence shows that following their recruitment, children were often taken to training camps across Ituri. You heard from former child soldiers who were taken far away from their families, from their friends, their villages. You also heard from their parents who lost their children. They had no idea where their children were taken, if they were safe, if they were hurt, or if they'd ever see them again. Conditions in UPC training camps were brutal and harsh, and the child recruits endured tremendous suffering. Several witnesses provided consistent, harrowing details about daily life. For instance, witnesses P898, P883, and P888 all testified that they were only fed one meal a day, when they would have hot food spooned directly into their bare hands or into their shirts. And if it burned and they dropped the food, they would go hungry that day. Witness P907, a military insider, testified that recruits at Mandro camp were served food with ashes mixed in, rotten beans, insect-infected maize. In his words, quote, food that could not even be eaten by anybody, end quote. He also testified that their clothes were full of lice. Witnesses P10, P769, and P907 described how children were subjected to demanding physical exercise and severely punished if they were unable to keep up with the adults. Children were unable to leave the UPC camps, afraid of being considered deserters and beaten or shot. Witness P898 testified that on Bosco Ntaganda's orders, UPC soldiers searched schools for deserters, and anyone found was flogged and brought back to the camp. It was a hostile, violent environment where children were indoctrinated through aggressive speeches and songs, taught to fire a weapon and kill the enemy, the Lendu. Bosco Ntaganda testified that there were no derogatory songs pertaining to any ethnic group sung in the UPC, and he denied that any derogatory songs against women were sung while he was in charge of military training. However, prosecution witnesses remembered the lyrics of such songs in detail, and they sang them for you in the courtroom. One song goes, I'm crying, give me a girl, give me a Lendu girl, so that I can fuck her all night, and then she'll complain about having backache because I screwed her. Another song went, Micheline, give me a knife with a basin so that I can slit the throat of a Lendu. Your Honors, these songs were independently recalled by two different witnesses from memory. Their lyrics are violent, derogatory against women, and against the Lendu ethnic group, emboldening criminal behavior. These are not songs learned by former APC soldiers. These are songs taught to UPC soldiers, sung by UPC soldiers, training to fight under Bosco Ntaganda's command. Several prosecution witnesses credibly testified that children were in fact sought after. They were seen as obedient, fearless, naive, and easy to exploit. You also heard that girls in the UPC were sexually exploited as well. These girls were sometimes referred to as PMF, short for Personnel Militaire Féminin. UPC soldiers and commanders used the highly coercive environment of the military camps to their advantage. They were armed, they exercised their physical power and their authority over these girls. Rape was widespread and systematic. Witness P10 referred to the raping of girls as a habit for the commanders, testifying that, I quote, "When we went to bed and there were a few girls missing, we knew only too well that the commander had taken them," end quote. P758 testified that we were all raped. You heard the detailed accounts of witnesses P758 and P883, both former child soldiers who were repeatedly and violently raped by UPC soldiers and commanders throughout their time in the UPC. They also testified about the sexual exploitation of other girls who were with them in the camps, as did witness P10. P78 was chosen by a commander to be in his escort. This commander only chose girls. They all lived with him, and they were regularly raped by him. She was raped by other soldiers and commanders as well. P883 testified that she was not even able to count the number of times she was raped. Quote, "You see, whether you were sitting down or sleeping, anyone who wanted to do so could rape you," end quote. She testified that at one point, a commander said no one else should touch her, as, quote, "he wanted to be the only one to rape me," end quote. Several UPC insiders similarly testified about the violence, the sexual violence against girls in the UPC that they saw or that they knew about. It was acknowledged that the girls had no choice. Witness P10 testified that nobody had sex with their commander, quote, "of their own volition," but it was an order on the part of the commander. And an order is an order after all, and you're obliged to execute the order, end quote. Girls in the UPC were extremely vulnerable. UPC soldiers and commanders were able to sexually exploit them at will, depriving them of their liberty and exercising power of ownership over them. Some girls were taken as so-called wives and forced to live with commanders, to do household chores, and to bear their children. Others were treated like the Guderia, after the communal cooking pot, as you heard about earlier from Madam Prosecutor, meaning that they were forced to have sex with whichever soldier demanded it. These rapes led girls in the UPC to suffer terrible physical injury, such as fistulas. You heard of a 9-year-old girl who was repeatedly raped at a UPC training camp and died from her injuries. Girls were infected with venereal disease, many got pregnant, While some received medical treatment or hospitalization, others were simply sent out of the UPC because they were of no use anymore. Bosco Ntaganda had several female escorts living in his residence in Bunia. One witness testified to having been raped by him. She testified that he raped her fellow escorts as well. Bosco Ntaganda is not charged as a direct perpetrator of rape or sexual slavery. However, Your Honors, this evidence is relevant to your determination of his intent and knowledge of crimes, the modes of liability charged, and the pattern evidence for contextual purposes. Bosco Ntaganda's flat denial that girls within the UPC were raped or that they got pregnant must be rejected in the face of extensive, credible evidence to the contrary. Your Honors, this chamber has held that rape and sexual enslavement by members of the same armed force constitutes war crimes, a conclusion that was affirmed by the appeals chamber. The evidence proves beyond reasonable doubt that children in the UPC were raped and sexually enslaved, and that these crimes took place in the context of and were associated with an armed conflict. I will now move on to a discussion of using children to participate actively in hostilities. As articulated in paragraphs 651 and 652 of the
Sorry to interrupt you, Ms. Sim. I just got to request if you can kindly a little bit slow down. Thank you.
Paragraphs 651 and 652 of the prosecution closing brief. The crime of using children to participate actively in hostilities covers a broad spectrum of activities, roles, and tasks, including, but not limited to, direct combat. Indeed, the very purpose of this prohibition is to protect children under 15 from the risks to their lives and their well-being resulting from certain activities where those activities are linked to the armed conflict. The UPC deployed children under the age of 15, just like any other soldiers. There was no distinction on the basis of age. The prosecution called extensive evidence showing how the UPC used children in a variety of combat-related activities and roles. You heard evidence about how UPC children under 15 were used to conduct armed patrols during which they would harass and arrest citizens, to control roadblocks where soldiers would extort money from civilians and rape women attempting to pass. You heard that children were used to guard civilian prisoners, to perform reconnaissance or act as spies or scouts, including in and around enemy installations, as they were less likely to arouse suspicion. You also heard about IS girls, girl soldiers who were given civilian clothing and ordered to seduce and have sex with enemy soldiers in order to gather intelligence about the number of troops and the types of weapons they had, work that was both demeaning and dangerous. Several witnesses testified about an entire platoon of child soldiers in the UPC, which was referred to as the Kidogo unit, that was part of the general staff. You also heard about children being used to fight in combat operations, where they could be injured or killed, and where they were forced to injure and kill. During his testimony, witness P907 described the particular difficulty the Kidogos he fought alongside had when they tried to run while wearing oversized uniforms and carrying heavy weapons. Witness P41 described the children who were deployed into combat as being almost the same size as their Kalashnikov guns. In paragraphs 660 to 662 of the prosecution closing brief, the prosecution presented evidence of child soldiers who fought in battles in many locations, including Bunia, Ntaganda, Songolo, Irumu, Nyakunde, Mabanga, Lanyo, Largu, and Buli, as well as during the first and the second attack. Your Honors, 6 military insiders testified about personally fighting alongside children. Witnesses P963, P17, P768, P10, P907, and P901. UPC commanders also used children as bodyguards. Many witnesses testified about seeing children being used as bodyguards by UPC commanders. In addition, 5 military and political insiders testified to personally using children as bodyguards while they were in the UPC during the period of the charges. P55, P768, P41, P907, and P911. Moreover, 13 witnesses testified about seeing Bosco Ntaganda using children as bodyguards or fighting with them in his unit. 2 former child soldiers testified about having fought in Bosco Ntaganda's unit. Numerous other prosecution witnesses testified about being recruited alongside children, about seeing children under 15 at UPC training camps, or about training children themselves, or about seeing children fighting on the front lines. 5 individuals testified to being under the age of 15 when they were recruited, trained, deployed, and used by the UPC. The prosecution articulates this evidence at paragraphs 695 to 750 of its brief. These children all lived through traumatic, deeply unsettling circumstances. Witness P758 testified, and I quote, "I was thinking a lot about the people I had killed. I was reliving the time that I had spent there, and at my age, I think of all the wrongs that had been caused. I wonder what sort of animal I'm like. I felt that I was no longer a human being. I thought about everything I had done. I was still so young. At my age, one couldn't envisage all these acts that I had committed, so I felt I was worthless." She was 13 when she was abducted by the UPC. These events occurred 15 years ago, when these witnesses were all children. Each of them provided detailed, coherent accounts. They named other children recruited with them. They named commanders, UPC camps, places where they fought. Their accounts were internally coherent and consistent with each other in many ways. Documents such as school records, birth certificates, and identity cards corroborated their dates of birth and the timing of their recruitment. Photographs of physical scars that some suffered corroborated the types of injuries they sustained. Family members of child soldiers also testified, corroborating the age of their child at the time of their recruitment by the UPC and the terrible psychological, and physical harm that their children suffered as a result of being in the UPC. Witness 769 also testified about the types of psychological trouble that children he worked with experienced, including insomnia, wetting their beds at night, having several types of phobias and fears, and being, quote, always on the guard, on the lookout, as if they expected a bullet or a shell or a bomb to drop on them at any time. Finally, Your Honors also heard evidence from former employees of local and international organizations based in the area who monitored the human rights situation and the demobilization of child soldiers. They not only observed children in the UPC, but also interacted with and interviewed them. These witnesses provided credible evidence about their interactions and about the methods they used to prepare reports and contemporaneously document the children they encountered. Many of these documents and reports were presented to the court. Bosco Ntaganda's testimony that there were no troops under the age of 18 in the UPC should be rejected as implausible. For this to be the case, it would require that all of the prosecution's witnesses who testified about using children, training children, interviewing children, or otherwise seeing children in the UPC were either intentionally deceiving the court or wholly mistaken about the ages of these children. It would also mean that the former child soldiers who testified before you in detail about their recruitment, about being taken to different UPC training camps, about the nature of that training, the songs they sung, being selected as escorts for commanders, and fighting in different battles, were also all not true, and that their parents who testified were similarly deceiving you or mistaken. Your Honors, this is neither reasonable nor plausible, given the consistency of the evidence they provided independently of each other. I will now move on to a discussion of documentary evidence. In addition to the consistent, credible witness testimony about the recruitment and use of child soldiers, the prosecution tendered numerous documents, including internal UPC documents that attest to the presence of children in the ranks of the UPC. Among these documents were 3 purported UPC demobilization orders. The evidence shows that nothing changed as a result of these orders. Children continued to be recruited and used. While these orders do not indicate a genuine intention by the UPC to demobilize child soldiers, they do show that child soldiers were present in the UPC and that Bosco Ntaganda and his co-perpetrators knew it. The first order from Thomas Lubanga, appearing on your screen, dated the 21st of October, 2002, refers to a practice of enrolling minors that has developed and then formally bans this practice in the UPC. The second order, dated the 27th of January, 2003, refers to this previous order and reiterates the ban on recruiting children under the age of 18. Indeed, you will recall in a 16 February 2003 report signed by Bosco Ntaganda's secretary under his instruction, in which he refers to Thomas Lubanga's 2 orders to demobilize child soldiers. And then, on the 1st of June, 2003, Thomas Lubanga issued a decree demobilizing all children under the age of 18 in the FPLC. All of the witnesses who were involved in demobilization efforts in Ituri at this time were unaware of any genuine attempt at demobilization by the UPC. Witness P976 referred to public efforts by the UPC to demobilize children as a sham, a reaction to international pressure. Children remained in the ranks of the UPC long after these orders were issued. UPC political and military insiders unanimously testified that these orders were never circulated or discussed. According to witness P901, quote, "Well, you know, the demobilization of children just didn't take place," end quote. When shown these 3 orders during his testimony, Bosco Ntaganda maintained that there were no children in the UPC and that these were a reminder from the president not to recruit children. But this characterization flies in the face of the plain wording on these documents. Far from a reminder, these documents acknowledge that there was an existing practice of recruiting children into the ranks of the UPC. The evidence proves that over the period of the charges, the UPC did not cease its recruitment of children or effect their demobilization from the army. Your Honors, I will now conclude my presentation by referring to the photographic and video evidence which the prosecution relied on to show children clearly under the age of 15 in the UPC. This is set out in detail in paragraphs 678 to 684 of the prosecution's brief. As articulated in both the brief and the prosecution response to the defense closing brief, this chamber is fully competent to assess the age of individuals appearing in these images, taking into account factors such as their size, their height, their physical development, as well as their behavior and movements. The appeals chamber of this court has affirmed that assessing the age of a child does not require external expertise or other corroboration. These images are a vivid, graphic depiction of the testimony of numerous witnesses who themselves saw UPC child soldiers. These images corroborate the wealth of other evidence about the presence of children under the age of 15 in the UPC. I will now take this opportunity to show your honors a few excerpts from the various items of video evidence. In these videos, which were created by the UPC, you will see young children armed and uniform, openly being used. The first excerpt is from a meeting in Ngongo between the UPC and the Lendu on the 14th of January, 2003, which high-level UPC members attended. It depicts several soldiers approaching a truck. One witness confirmed that this group, in fact, returned to Thomas Lubanga's residence following this meeting in order to report back to him. There is one particular individual in this video who is in uniform and who will be indicated with a highlighting in the excerpt played. And I would ask you to compare his height and his size with his weapon and with the people around him, as well as with the truck he's standing beside. I will play it now. child is on the left of the screen and now is crossing to the right. I will play this short excerpt for you a second time. Your Honors, the second excerpt I will show you is from a video recorded on the 23rd of January, 2003, at a meeting between the UPC and the UPDF in Bunia. In it, you will see a dark truck with several armed, uniformed UPC soldiers in the back. This excerpt will first be played at regular speed, and then it will be played slowed down. I would ask you to focus on two individuals wearing floppy hats sitting on the back door of the truck. You are clearly able to compare them to the size of the soldiers sitting on either side. And as they're all with their legs over the side of the truck, it's obvious that they're all seated at the same level. I will play this video now. So this first is at full speed, as I said. The video will now play a second time slowed down, and the two individuals will be in highlighting. These two individuals are dwarfed by the adult men sitting beside them. They are clearly very young children under the age of 15. As your honors will recall, the prosecution also tendered a video recording that shows Bosco Ntaganda, as well as other senior members of the UPC, including Thomas Lubanga, Jean Tinenzabo, Amable Rafiki, visiting Rampara training camp on the 12th of February, 2003, and addressing the recruits there. Among the soldiers and recruits present are children who are clearly under the age of 15. This visit occurred after Thomas Lubanga was said to have issued 2 demobilization orders on the 21st of October 2002 and the 27th of January 2003. The 12th of February 2003 is also the very same day that the UPC National Secretary sent a letter to the G5, which we saw earlier in my presentation and which is up on your screen again. This letter was copied to Thomas Lubanga and the État-Major in Bunia. It's about the demobilization program aimed at 10 to 15 or 16-year-olds. The fact that senior UPC members visited a military training camp where there are children clearly under the age of 15 is evidence of Bosco Ntaganda and his co-perpetrators' knowledge of children being in the UPC and the lack of any genuine intention to demobilize them. I will play 3 brief excerpts from the Rampara video without sound, as it has also been slowed down slightly. Once again, I would ask your honors to observe the height, the size, the mannerisms of the individuals who are highlighted in this video, individuals who we say are clearly children. In the first excerpt, you will see Thomas Lubanga in uniform with a wide brim camouflage hat, as well as several armed UPC soldiers. You will also see a very small recruit in a white shirt standing in the front row, singing and clapping. The next excerpt I will show has several individuals in the crowd who are clearly under the age of 15. Once again, they will be depicted with highlighting. And finally, Your Honors, I will play an excerpt that's essentially a freeze frame so that you can more clearly compare the individual to the people around him. And once again, the individual in highlighting is the one we're speaking of. Your Honors, Bosco Ntaganda conceded that some of the individuals shown in the Rampara video did not meet his criteria. He testified that they were sent home. He also testified that he did not return to Rampara following this 12th of February 2003 visit. This explanation is implausible. Your Honor, all of the individuals in this video are UPC recruits, including those children under the age of 15. As is clear from the manner in which they are addressed and the circumstances surrounding their being there. As you will recall in this video, Thomas Lubanga first addresses the recruits around him, saying, and I quote, "Soldiers, even those who have weapons, even those who have pieces of wood, even those with empty hands, soldiers." He goes on to introduce himself. "I am Thomas Lubanga, the president of our party, the UPC." Then he introduces Bosco Ntaganda as follows. "You are used to meeting our commanders who are helping with this work of training, who are building the army every day. I am with them all the time, but there is a lot of work, a lot. And sometimes my work means that I have to go out. I have meetings all the time, so it is difficult for me to meet with all of you all the time. The Chief of Staff, Commander Bosco, has come to see you. Does he come here? Does he come? If he does not come, you tell me. Does he come? I would consider him like an enemy, but I think he cannot do that. He needs the army. He is the army leader. So we came to see you and to encourage you. Why encourage you? Because this work that we are doing together with you, this work that you know of going into the army, of getting trained, of taking up arms, this work that is blessed." End quote. The crime of enlistment occurs at the moment a child enrolls or joins an armed group, and it is continuous until that child leaves the armed group or reaches the age of 15. Furthermore, there is no requirement that the recruited child is then trained to use weapons or even eventually used in conflict, in combat. The video recording shows children, some clearly under the age of 15, present at a UPC training camp. They are far removed from the civilian population, where civilians are not permitted. They are being addressed as soldiers and as recruits by the president of the UPC. They are surrounded by armed soldiers and told to have courage during their training and that their work is blessed. It is implausible to suggest that these children are simply being allowed to stand around as the defense contends. They are UPC recruits. Your Honors, nothing the defense presented raised reasonable doubt that all of the individuals seen in this video recording have been recruited by the UPC. I will play one last excerpt from the Rampara video. This video will be shown twice, first at full speed and then in slow motion. In it, Bosco Ntaganda is visible, wearing his purple robe. You will see him enter the white truck, the very end. You will also see Jean Tinenzabo saluting, as well as Thomas Lumbaga again. Also visible is a UPC soldier. He is in uniform and he is carrying a weapon. Your Honors heard evidence that this individual was, quote, a real Kadogo, end quote, and one of Bosco Ntaganda's bodyguards. This individual is clearly visible. His height and size can be objectively compared to the adults around him, as well as the truck in which he deposits his weapon. This child is a UPC child soldier. It is simply not possible that a military commander genuinely committed to ensuring that no children were recruited could stand before these recruits. Bosco Ntaganda and his co-perpetrators intended for those under the age of 15, plainly present before them, to be provided with military training and sent into combat, just like any other soldier. Your Honors, when you consider the amount of detailed evidence provided by prosecution witnesses in its totality, from military and political insiders, former UPC child soldiers, relatives of those child soldiers, individuals whose job it was to identify and assist child soldiers, and the consistency of this evidence, including information contained in the UPC's own videos and documents. It demonstrates beyond reasonable doubt that children under 15 were recruited and used by the UPC and by Bosco Ntaganda personally. This concludes my presentation, and I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sim. If you allow, I would like to make one, again, small but maybe important correction of the transcript we got together with you. It's English version, page 79, line 2. You spoke about children or child soldiers, and at the moment we have in the transcript that they were naive. K-N-A-V-E. But if I listened, if I heard correctly, I heard naive.
That's correct.
Correct. Okay,
That's
so
correct.
it should be corrected as naive.
Thank you.
N-A-I-V-E. Thank you very much. Now we will take our lunch break, which will take 90 minutes, which means that we will resume at 2:30.
All rise.
Veuillez vous lever.